Good afternoon, and thanks for clicking on to the Tuesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. What a weather whiplash we've got going. This was the temperature anomalies back on Saturday at 12Z, and this is what we have to contend with as the first plunge of Arctic air moves south. Major swing in temperature. September is traditionally a transition month, but lo and behold, we do have a very significant flip. Weather whiplash is probably the best way to describe it, and these temperature anomalies really kind of drive home the point that this is quite the flip around. We've got one tweet here, quite interesting, by Franz Larsen. You're not wrong. It was 32 Celsius on Sunday in Upper Austria, 15 yesterday, and only 9 forecast for Friday. Bit of a shock to the system, says Franz. And bear in mind the temperatures even at 4,000 feet above the surface was 20.6 back on Friday afternoon. And these are the current temperatures at the very same location. Annaghmore sitting as of just before 4:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the 10th of September. We're sitting on 0.1 Celsius with a wind chill of minus 5.8. And we have got quite a distinct contrast actually across the UK. 8s and 9s quite widely across the north. Then as you move further south, kind of low to mid-teens. Then the further south you go, still you've got the 18s and 19s. And this cold air will continue to drive south over the course of the rest of today. I wanted to show you this chart here off the GFS model. This is off Tropical Tidbits. Deep area of low pressure, very windy conditions across the majority of the UK during the course of today. Winds veering from west, southwest, then west, northwest, and then they're eventually now starting to veer northerly as that low then pulls to the east. We're going to see the Arctic air really start to penetrate across the UK. But I'm wanting to draw your attention to the height lines here, the thickness values. We've got the 558 thickness across the south of the UK here. That's generally kind of marking the dividing line between 558 and 546. That's kind of generally the dividing line between mild to warmer versus colder. And once you get down to 540, 534, that's generally where you start to see precipitation kind of change within the column from liquid to frozen. Obviously, we're still early on in the season, so therefore we're not really seeing snowfall, obviously, down to low levels. We will get likely light accumulations over the tops of the Cairngorms and the Highlands, for example, the Grampians, possibly even the North Pennines. There is a small opportunity, I think, for that as well. But it's if this was 2 months down the road, that 534 height line would be watched for precipitation changing to frozen. But 978 millibars, that is not a too shabby area of low pressure for early September by any stretch. Notice here the winds very, very strong, especially on the western flank of the centre, over parts of Shetland, for example. Very, very nasty conditions. Gale force winds, heavy wind-driven rain, significant amounts of rain as well. That has been causing issues up across the Northern Isles through the course of this afternoon. But you notice here the pressure continues to fall as it moves towards the Norwegian coast, and then really the floodgates open up. There's that 534 line now starting to drop all the way into the southern UK here. So we're flooding the UK atmosphere with the early season Arctic air, and it is certainly notable and noticeable. That northwesterly flow will continue through tomorrow into Thursday, and then you notice here that we've got higher pressure to the west. That is going to then move its way into the UK as we progress through the course of Thursday. What that's going to do is it's going to set the scene for a potential cold night Wednesday night and into Thursday night, into Friday. Winds fall light, clear skies, and relatively cold air within the atmosphere itself will mean that away from towns and cities, you have a chance of getting close to freezing even down into northern portions of England, possibly extending into the Midlands as well as we progress into the early hours of Friday morning. Then we will start to see change taking place. Area of low pressure then starts to move towards Iceland, and with higher pressure then kind of sinking slightly to the south, we're then changing the winds from northwest to southwest once again. We're going to pull in milder conditions through the course of the weekend here, but you notice we've got wet weather across the northern half of the British Isles as we move into the weekend itself. But that being said, higher pressure is going to be quite dominant, I think, as we move into next week and beyond. We've got a fairly strong area of high pressure that kind of just planks itself over the UK and Ireland, and that may be attributed to the MJO being in a strengthening phase 6, which tends to promote higher pressure over the UK, Ireland, and northwestern Europe here. So you can see quite an increase in amplification of the MJO in phases 6, which, like I say, that promotes higher pressure. So if we look back at the chart here, let's kind of zoom out ever so slightly and see what it's showing with regards to the ensemble here. So this weather whiplash is very apparent here. We go from heat during the second half of last week to middle portions late this week. Very, very opposite atmosphere in terms of temperature profile and air mass, etc. But then we flip back to a warmer situation as we go through the course of next week here. So let's go to the GFS upcoming 5-day period here, and it basically tells you the story quite nicely. So this is the upper chart for the next 5 days, looking like this here. So we've got that trough driving south here, bringing some very, very cold early season air into the heart of Europe here, going from 30s to single digit highs in parts of mid to high ground, Austria, for example, Switzerland as well. What a difference this is going to be. Then the 6 to 10 day, you can see here that we flip the pattern around. Down goes that trough. We could see some very significant heavy rainfall down across parts of the Balkans, the central Med, into the eastern Med as well. Greece, Turkey, for example, could see some very nasty conditions developing with this area of low pressure. Notice the patterns flipping back to what it was. The only difference between next week and the end of last week is essentially we've got the cutoff low back in play once again, but it's further east if you notice. Instead of it being over Biscay, affecting northern France, the southern UK, it's down to the southeast. But you notice the pattern coming back into play once again. And then as we move into the 11 to 15 day, it's looking like this here. High pressure, but generally slightly to the north of the UK and Europe in general. Looking at precipitation, upcoming 7 days, looks like this here. Dry across the majority of the UK. Then you notice here as we play through the sequence, that dry signal becomes very prominent as we progress through the middle and second half of September. So it looks as if higher pressure and drier conditions is going to, if this is correct, obviously, it's going to see out the rest of the month. And I said average temperatures and average rainfall for the month of September. Let's have a look at the temperature anomalies here. Because remember, we had this is the first 10 days of the month. In fact, this is the past 5 days. I apologize. So this is the past 5 days. Look at Scandinavia and look at the heart of Europe. Look at the UK, warmer than average. Ireland, warmer than average. France, below average, and Iberia, below average, due to the fact that we had that cut-off low bang slap over this region for that past 5 day period. Let's have a look at the month to date and see what it's showing here for the first 10 days of September. Somewhat warmer than average, but remember that we have this as the upcoming 5 day period. So that is likely to really push that anomaly average to even slightly below average. But this weather whiplash is kind of something that I'm wanting to drive home the point Look at this in the 6 to 10, warmer than average. And then the 11 to 15, warmer than average, higher pressure, drier conditions. I think the rest of September is going to actually turn out not too bad. So this kind of back and forth seesaw of weather conditions. But this pattern is becoming rather interesting, folks, because if we look at the Arctic oscillation, it's going more and more negative. So this is a big change from what we've seen back during the majority of this summer past. Positive AO, positive NAO. The question is, why are we going into negative territory now? My opinion is the SOI has went more positive. We've slowed down the westerlies and we've allowed pressure that has been strong within the mid latitudes of the northern hemisphere to then lift northwards up into the Arctic, into the North Atlantic, Greenland, allowing this discharge of cold air into North America, because we're seeing that over the other side of the Atlantic as well, but we're also seeing in the western side of Europe as well. I think this is part of a bigger, larger scale change, and there is a connection to all this with what I think is happening in terms of the polar vortex. I want to show you a couple of interesting tweets, and this is just something I'm going to touch on, but we will look at this in a bit more detail going forward. This is a tweet here by Judah Cohen, who is somewhat of a polar vortex expert. He says, I often discussed the bizarre behavior of the stratosphere during this summer, and that behavior continues into the fall with unusually warm polar cap heights in the lower stratosphere predicted to expand upwards and downward, resulting in a near record weak polar vortex and negative Arctic oscillation. So I think what we're seeing right now with this discharge of Arctic air in North America and Europe is part of a bigger picture thing that may come back time and time again going forward. We're going to see a recovery in the temperature. We're seeing higher pressure, drier conditions during the mid and second half of September. I think what we're seeing now could be a harbinger of things to come later down the road, even in the relatively medium term, but I'm also talking about the long term as well. I'm talking about the early portions of winter. But it's very, very interesting, and I kind of put this little piece on to that myself, and I say that I wonder if the Arctic air descending into both US and Europe this week, briefly, is part of a bigger picture change, interesting times coming up. So you can see here that the polar vortex is supposed to be quite weak. There was another tweet that I kind of responded to as well by meteorologist Marka Gaveev, I think it is how you pronounce it. I hope I'm right in saying that. He says the latest polar vortex update from the EPS record week September vortex forecast. He goes on to say that this could be this is significant and a major change from recent autumns. Remember, a weaker than normal polar vortex means that the winds circling the North Pole, which would normally bottle up the cold around the pole, are not as effective at doing so. This allows cold air outbreaks into the low latitudes, very similar to what we saw yesterday and today in the eastern and central United States. So this is the records that fell, by the way, over recent days over the eastern United States. And we could see some stations within the northern UK fail to get above 10 Celsius, and by doing so we may have a couple of date records that could fall over northern UK with this Arctic outbreak. And this is very much all interlinked. This is all connected. The cold into North America and the cold into Western Europe is all part of the same thing, the AO and the NAO going negative. And I say that I wonder if there's a link here to what happened over the South Pole in recent months. So this is very interesting times coming up. You notice that the Arctic oscillation, which when negative, means that we've got the higher pressure over the Arctic, a weaker westerly flow around the polar vortex, and also a greater chance of seeing cold getting drawn out of the Arctic into the middle altitudes. You notice here that it's going deeper and deeper into negative territory. I personally think this could be an SOI reaction, and like I said, it's all part of the potential that the recent months of stratospheric warming, what happened over the South Pole, and then a potential link to what is going to happen with the polar vortex over the northern hemisphere. The North Atlantic Oscillation going negative as well. Notice here there's a little bit of a recovery, but then it's expected to go into negative once again. So this cold outbreak, essentially what I'm getting at is this cold outbreak that we've got going at the moment is more than likely to repeat itself in perhaps 2 or 3 weeks' time. So we'll watch this space as we go into October. Would not be surprised if we see another cold outbreak later down the road. Wanted to show this GFS model here for Inverness. We're going to look at Inverness and we're going to look at London today off the GFS. These are maximum temperatures. Also, precipitation is an important one. So the little blue boxes here at the bottom represent rainfall. You notice something, that as we go beyond what this would be the 16th of the month, you notice here that we have literally no rain to speak about once we move towards the middle and second half of September, seen by the GFS for Inverness. Look at London as well. We'll look at temperature in just a second as well. Look at London. A couple of little spikes over the next few days here. Then it's nothing. So very, very dry. High pressure really dominates the pattern. But look at the temperatures. We'll see the temperatures dropping off to the lowest values. Maximum at London, 14 Celsius tomorrow afternoon. 14.3 on Thursday. Then we have this steady rise in temperature during the course of the weekend, and then into next week we go back into the low 20s for the southeast of the UK here. So we've got this generally mild pattern mid and late September seen by the model, generally 22-23 Celsius days, and what's nighttime temperatures, kind of overnight temperatures 14 Celsius, so fairly mild actually. And that seems to be a theme through the majority of next week. Let's have a look at Inverness here. And we've got a couple of days where it's a real struggle to get above 10. So 10 today. Then we've got a maximum of 10.5 tomorrow. Overnight temperatures down to 4 degrees. Then 5.8. A little bit of wind involved in that as well. I think we bottom out early Friday morning, 4, according to the GFS. Then, like London, not quite as much, but like London, we've got this warming trend back to 16. Then we climb all the way to 20.4 next Tuesday. You see this general warming trend taking place into the weekend and into next week as higher pressure moves back in, winds veer more southwesterly again as well. So you see the general idea. I'm very, very curious about this polar vortex, the weakness in the polar vortex, and all other aspects thrown in there as well. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please leave a comment, hit that like button, and also if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button as well. It would be greatly appreciated. Lots of things coming up. I will end with this. I almost forgot the hurricane season. Tropical storm Francine is slowly strengthening in the Western Gulf. Got winds at 65 miles per hour. Not an awful lot of change over the last 12 hours or so, but the pressure continues to fall, which is the thing that really stands out when you're seeing that pressure fall. And even though the winds aren't overly climbing in response to that, generally speaking, you would expect eventually the winds to kind of reflect that pressure drop. It's continuing to move in a northeasterly direction at 8 miles per hour. If we click on here, what is going to happen is I think it's engaging with the land interaction, so it's quite close to Mexico, it's quite close to Texas as well. It's entraining dry air into the circulation itself, and that is causing a lot of decay on the southern flank of the circulation. But the National Hurricane Center does expect it to move away from that land area, engage with some very, very warm sea surface temperatures, not just at the surface, but deep below the surface. If we look at the ocean heat content, you've got some very super warm deep waters here. And as the winds within the atmosphere ease, we have the 30 Celsius waters to quite deep levels. We've also got a bit of a loop current showing up here, which can be added fuel, high octane fuel for this system. Winds drop off, dry air entrainment kind of stops for a period of time. That is when we're likely to see the window of opportunity for Francine to strengthen into a possibly high-end Cat 1, low-end Cat 2 hurricane. Then as it approaches the Louisiana coast, it's going to then start to feel stronger westerly winds right along the coastline. So we are likely to see a peak, possibly close to 100 miles per hour, then weaken back to around maybe 85 miles per hour. But this next 12 hours or so is going to be critical in terms of how much Francine can strengthen. Let's have a very quick look at the infrared real quick and see what it's showing here, because I've not actually looked at this in a little while here. But you can actually start to see some of this blow up of convection here peeling away from the circulation itself, and it looks as if it's kind of trying to refire a new wave of convection. And you can see here the spin within the circulation. There's no eye defined, but this ball of deep convection here, very high cloud tops, cold cloud tops, it'll be interesting to see if that can start to kind of wrap around the center and try and kind of develop some sort of an eye. But it's interesting how this ball of convection here lifting to the northeast is kind of moving away from the system, and it looks as if it's trying to reconsolidate, reorganize to the east of Mexico here. But the less dry air entrainment, a reduction in wind shear over that very warm waters should allow the system to strengthen over the next 24 hours, and it's expected to make a landfall sometime tomorrow. There will be a tropical outlook looking at this in a little bit more detail coming up over the next 24 hours, so stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for plenty more content here on the channel. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. I'll see you again tomorrow with more. Bye for now.